I like to say, if you give them space, they have someplace to go, right? To move toward you. So filling that space, there's no room for them. We got to make the space.
Julie Skolnick is an advocate for twice exceptional kids, but she doesn't work directly with the kids. She specializes in working with parents to teach them how to work with their kids. Our conversation today is about how parents can support and advocate for their bright neurodivergent kids, how to help kids build their executive functioning skills, and tips for helping kids with transitions. All of that is straight ahead on episode 124. I'm Emily Kircher-Morris, and this is the Neurodiversity Podcast.
What is neurodiversity?
You see the world differently.
Autism spectrum.
Gifted.
Complexities that are inherently inside.
ADHD.
Dysgraphia.
Tourette's.
All brains are different.
You are exactly what this world needs.
This is the
Neurodiversity
Podcast.
It's the time of year when educators begin planning for their professional development for the next school year. And if you teach neurodivergent gifted kids, you won't want to miss this. Our first virtual course for educators is out. Strategies for Supporting Twice Exceptional Students offers up to 15 hours of continuing education, and it's being offered to school districts to use for in-house professional development training. It's offered exclusively to school districts right now and will open it up to individuals in the future. It can be facilitated as an in-person training throughout the year or as a self-study course for teachers to complete on their own time. If your district is working to find ways to support twice exceptional kids, you should take a look. You can find out more at neurodiversity.university. Again, the website is neurodiversity.university. We'll put a link to it in the show notes. Okay, my conversation with Julie Skolnick is up next.
You're listening to the
Neurodiversity
Podcast.
Today, I'm excited to welcome Julie Skolnick to the podcast. Julie is the founder of With Understanding Comes Calm, LLC, and the host of the virtual summit series, Let's Talk 2E. Julie, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us today.
Thanks for having me, Emily. I'm excited to be here.
Tell us a little bit about your background and work with neurodivergent kids and families.
Yeah, so I am really passionate about what I do. I started back in 2014, and my tagline was guiding or supporting parents of gifted and distractible kids, because back then even fewer people knew about 2E and gifted and the true meaning of those things. I raised 3 awesome 2E kiddos, 21, 19, and 13. And I have probably, at this point, thousands of clients all over the world who are parents, who are 2E adults, who are teachers, who are all sorts of professionals, who I really work hard with on bringing out the best in raising self-confidence in 2E people. And that is really our mission at With Understanding Comes Calm. And my theory really is, people frequently ask, well, do you work with kids? And the truth is, I don't. My theory is that we have to circle the wagons of the grown-ups because the kids don't have the power. And so in order for our kids to strengthen their self-confidence, we need the people around them to help them understand who they are. They're not just going to stand up and say, yeah, this is hard, but I love myself. You know, we need to be able to positively reframe and be strength-based to help them come to that place, and for all the grown-ups around them to respond rather than react, so that they can really learn those lagging skills that they need and that they can tap into those awesome superpowers that they have.
When I work with my clients at the office, parents, when they first come in, will say, well, should I come into the session? Are you just going to work with my kids? You know, and I say, well, yes, I am going to be primarily working with your child in our setting, but this is not something that they can fix on their own. We have to have that support. We have to take a team approach, bring in the educators, bring in the parents in order to really help those kids be successful.
Yeah, definitely a holistic approach has to happen. And for me, really diving deep, you know, and taking so often parents are judged and, speaking about parents specifically, are judged or they're shamed or they just don't get it and they don't understand and they don't know themselves. And so they're sort of banging their head against the wall and recognizing, I keep trying these strategies over and over and they're not working. And, I give them kind of permission to parent differently and to stop using those old, quote, tried and true strategies that their own parents used and do something different.
So I know that both of us have this background working a lot with twice exceptional kids, but I do feel like the skills and the practical pieces that we're going to be talking about today really are applicable to neurodivergent kids, not necessarily just twice exceptional. But I thought we might start off just by talking a little bit about executive functioning skills and how that impacts neurodivergent, twice exceptional gifted kids, whether their strengths or struggles there with those executive functioning skills.
Yeah, so executive functioning is this ability to not just organize, like everybody thinks it's like, let's use colored folders and planners. And that's, a little part of executive functioning, but it's really, it regulates your emotions, it regulates your behavior, it regulates your attention. And so for all people, first of all, nobody's born with strong executive functioning skills. People, that's a myth. You actually have to learn them. There are some people for sure who learn executive functioning skills faster. Maybe they have role models, right? This is all neurological. So if one person in the family is challenged by executive functions, probably one of the parents or both of the parents are challenged by executive functions. And so what frequently happens is schools are asking the executive functioning challenged child to tell their parent where to find all the stuff, or to have their executive functioning challenged parent help the child find all the stuff and do all the stuff and have these skills. And it's like, wait.
Yes.
So, but guess what? Teachers aren't really taught how to teach kids executive functioning either. So there are some really important tried and true strategies. I actually give a whole talk on executive functioning. And one of the things that I love is the GPS or Guide for Parent Success that I actually ask teachers to give to parents, but I ask parents to ask from teachers if they don't give it to them naturally, which is literally a list of, okay, where do we find assignments for your specific class? Because we all know there's like 50 million ways you can find what class assignments there are. And even for homeschooling parents, this is really important to think about, like, where do you keep all this stuff? How much time are you supposed to spend? How do I reach you if I have a question? I love to suggest that the tabs on a child's browser are all set with the important stuff. Passwords, where to find the homework, which classes there are. It's so funny. Yesterday, I was working with a client and their child is a junior in high school. And the kid is like, I am not using a planner. That does not work for my brain, right? Bravo, kiddo. You're right. It doesn't work. So why bother keep trying? It's just another thing to do. And so we have to think about ways that work for our kids and to ask them what works for them. Executive functioning is a whole thing that we can talk about. And like all challenges, it requires the adult in the room to ask the child what works. And by the way, what doesn't work? So if your kid isn't starting something, if your kid isn't finishing something, if your child isn't regulating their emotions, which is all part of executive functioning. And by the way, social skills, 100% executive functions. Who do I talk to? When do I talk? How do I know? All of those things. You got to check in with your kid. You got to, first of all, validate their experience. There's probably a negative one because this is an area of struggle. So validate. I like to say validate and reiterate for parents. We go into a situation, we want to solve the problem, right? Well, especially where I live with 2E kids, gifted and 2E kids, they want to be a part of the solution. They have a very interesting, perhaps different way of solving a problem. All neurodivergent people probably do, and we don't outgrow it. So I'm talking to you too, 2E adults and neurodivergent adults. And so we have to get their input. For it to be a sticky solution, the person who is challenged needs to be part of the solution, not just solving the problem. So validate, reiterate those facts of what's going on. Wow, you were on the playground and you were talking to that kid and that was really hard. It didn't seem like they were so kind. And you don't have to say, well, next time, why don't you? Instead, it's sort of, what do you wish happened? Or what do you think could be different next time? And by the way, Emily, executive functioning, processing speed, working memory, these conversations that I'm talking about might happen over several times, not one sitting, because if we're in our emotional place, we're not going to be able to access or engage.
I think that's a really common misconception. I've shared this before in some of the talks that I give. I often felt when I first started and I was working with parents, and I would feel like as they left the office, I had to have provided them with specific strategies, like this is the thing that's going to fix the problem. And what I've learned over the years is that it doesn't happen that way, and you can't expect it to happen that way. And you really do have to just kind of trust that process and recognize that this is an ongoing, evolving process that will continue over the years. And so I feel like sometimes you might have some of those very discrete conversations, like what happened, let's problem solve, but other times it's just part of the dynamic and the relationship and what you're constantly talking to your kids about day in and day out, because that's how they grow and different things will happen over time. They just need to be able to process them in an ongoing basis.
I like to say, if you give them space, they have someplace to go, right? To move toward you. So filling that space, there's no room for them. We got to make the space.
So one of the specific difficulties that I thought would be really useful and to really just hone in on was specifically about difficulty with transitions. What does it mean when we talk about a child who has difficulty with transitions, and what would that maybe look like? What would we see?
Anybody have a kid who has a hard time with transitions, right? And what is a transition? Well, just about everything. When you wake up, you're transitioning from sleeping. When you go to eat, you're transitioning from not eating. When you get in the car, everything is a transition. And so there are all these micro transitions. So first of all, I want to back up a little bit and talk about that neurodivergent profile and why that would lead to transitions being challenging. So if we think about sensory sensitivity, so how are we told it's time to transition? Is it in a calm, soft, slow way? Or is it like, oh my God, we gotta go, right? Or pick up, hurry, we're late. I feel like, those old car alarms that used to go through all these different, that's us in the morning. It's like, get up, hurry, are you gonna be late? You're gonna be late. You're like, oh, stop the alarm. Okay, we don't want to be car alarms. So sensory sensitivity definitely gets into it. Emotion regulation, if our bucket of resilience that I talk about with clients isn't full, right? I don't want to get up. I don't want to move. I don't want to change. If we're really hyper-focused and in flow on something, which we tend to be as neurodivergent people, then it's harder for us to, if we're going to transition to a low interest something, that's harder. Of course, anxiety is part of the profile very often. Needing to be in control, that other side of anxiety and not knowing. I have clients who'll be like, oh my gosh, we were going to go out to dinner and to their favorite place and they don't want to go. I have so many examples of kids having a challenge to transition even to a preferred task because of all these other things that can be going on for them. Working memory, attention, processing speed, all of these parts of the profile affect transitions. And so we have to take that into account when we think about it. So what does it look like? I can think of, I have a client who had a child, they went to this incredible ski trip, right? Kid loves to ski. They travel to this amazing place, they get there, and he's like, yeah, no, not going. I have other clients in Europe who drove to some amazing destination. They get there, they're going to go out and see the town. The first example was like I think 8-year-old. The second example is a 16-year-old. He's like, no, not going. I have another client whose kid loved to do this online class, and so they were going to do the next level. The kid really loved it, asked for it. They get to it. She's like, yeah, no, not doing it. So why does this happen? So in example number 1, first of all, there's a really interesting, and I'd love to know what you think about it, Emily. There's a really interesting European, I don't even know if it's officially a diagnosis, but pathological demand avoidance. This is something that we see in different profiles, and part of it is definitely tied up in anxiety and actually having demands put, so it has to do with, 1, the profile of the person who's transitioning, but 2, the way the grown-up is trying to get this person to transition. And again, I'm going to say it's so important to talk with the child. So much is anticipatory. Like knowing that your child has a hard time, don't try it again. Just surprising them with a restaurant choice. Even if you love surprises, maybe your kid doesn't. So it's really anticipating what this child has done before and how to tell them about it. So with the first example, I worked through with the parents who called me from vacation, and I was like, okay, so have dad, who's going out with little brother, take a video of little brother skiing and meet for lunch at the chalet and then show the video. And so he starts to see and be reminded, because it actually wasn't the first time they had been there, to give these kind of visual cues. And also just don't engage in the power struggle. Sit down, read a book, be there, get in your mind you're going to miss the day of skiing. Which do you want? Do you want to be in a huge power struggle, screaming match that's going to ruin the rest of the vacation? Or can you give up this one day to just lean into his timeline? With number 2, it was like this client actually ended up sort of forcing their child to come out on the town in Europe. And I said, how did that go for you? Did you have, I knew what the goal was. The goal was they wanted to have a beautiful family time in the middle of Austria. And this kid was like, no. And he was sullen. They missed a bus. They didn't make it anywhere. Nothing was fun. But if they had let him stay, being like, dude, validate, reiterate, right? Dude, you look spent from our drive. Why don't you chill in the hotel room? We're going to go do this. At this o'clock, we're going to come back, and my expectation is we're all going to go to lunch together. So the kid gets to do what he wants. He was older. He could stay in the hotel room alone. And then, leaning in and thinking about that. With example number 3 of the child who was doing some enrichment online, mom totally backed off and gave that space we talked about before. And actually the kid came around and was like, you know what, maybe I'll just try the first class. So as much as we try to solve problems for our kids, because of all of this neurological wiring, the sensory stuff, the anxiety, the control, all the stuff we talked about, we actually have to let them come to it. And we can do that by backing off. We can do that by giving choice. We can do that by, when it's not in the moment of this kind of meltdown, by talking it through and seeing what you can do next time.
I think the things that I see most effective, like you mentioned, are the front loading of expectations, and not even just expectations, but just talking through, knowing what's going to happen. I see kids shutting down when something doesn't go the way that they had it in their mind. And sometimes we don't realize how they have it in their mind.
That's for sure.
If we don't ask them, things blow up and we're like, wait a second, what just happened here? But when you backtrack, you're like, oh, well, they expected this thing to happen. I expected this. Those things didn't align. And now they're having to readjust. And that's that transition. I was thinking as you were giving those examples, for some reason it came to mind, the number of kids who I work with who don't want to go on spring break or summer vacation. They would just rather stay in school. Not that they love school, but it's consistent. They know what to expect.
Yeah, the structure.
Yeah. And so the back and forth of okay, now we're not in school. Now we are in school. It's like, please don't give me a snow day. Just let me go to school. I know what to do there. I don't have to transition and shift those expectations. If they do struggle with those executive functioning skills, if they do struggle with social situations, it eliminates the need for that if everything's just kind of the same.
It's interesting that you give that example, Emily, because in my client population, for sure, school is not a friendly place. But I could absolutely see that structure. And I do see with my clients when they come home on break, it all falls apart, or there's battles over screen time, of course. And I really think involving the child, while front loading is a great idea, I also think sort of saying the expectation and asking the child how to handle it is also a good idea.
Oh, totally.
Tomorrow we're going to go to this restaurant. How will that work for you? How can we make this easier for you?
Yeah.
What do you need?
Collaborating, for sure.
And even, in a classroom situation, the kid who has a hard time transitioning, they're the one in charge of dinging the little Zen bell to give everybody the 5-minute warning, right? Let them be in control of the transition. And I really like to involve the kids in that way. And even, if we're transitioning from high interest to low interest, or even from low interest to high interest, it's like, okay, so how can we make this go smoothly? What do you need? And really going back and asking, involving the kid and collaborating, like you said. Yeah.
We've talked a little bit about what like parents or maybe educators could kind of do on their end. Are there any specific skills or strategies kids learn that can help them, like something that they are able to implement on their own?
I do a lot of role playing with clients. And so let's think about what we would want our kids to do. We would want our kids to say, hey, this is hard for me. I need help. So that means we need to role model and maybe even role play with stuffed animals, how to do that. We need our kids to be self-aware, but in a way that's not judgmental, shameful, or pointing out the negatives, right? Like, you know what I notice about you? Your body is like this huge antenna. You take in so much from the world in such an incredible organic way. I can imagine sometimes it feels like the volume is just too loud on the planet. And so give it this positive spin, give it this validation of what's hard, and then say, sometimes I think when we get into the carpool car, it's a lot of noise for you. So I'd love to know what I could do to make that experience better.
Yeah.
We really, really, this is why I work with grownups. We really, really have to role model what we want. So if we're having a hard time, let me tell you, I really recommend when I do my parent empowerment groups at the end, when everybody's transitioning out of this awesome bonding experience, learning experience, I'm like, okay, guys, we're going to do a breath because you're transitioning back into life. So I really recommend doing a breath for as many transitions as you can. Start with your meal, and we're sitting down to dinner, let's say, with your family, and being able to say, you know what I learned today? I learned that breathing is really good for digestion, and I'm going to breathe. And then you and partner or spouse, or you on your own, are going to verbalize how you're going to breathe and how it helps you. And you're going to make that a practice. And then maybe you're going to add it to before bedtime or before you leave the house. So breathing is another really great strategy that you can do anywhere. I always say to my clients and my parent empowerment group folks, I always say, you have your lungs and yourself always, so you can do this anywhere at any time.
I love that because it's also just a cue. Like, this is where the transition is happening. We're taking this shift. We're pausing right now and just kind of taking that mindful moment. It's not long. We're consciously shifting what we're doing into this new environment or situation.
Yeah. And then I have a strategy I teach called creating a wake. Okay. So you think of a boat with a wake in the back and everything gets collected in that wake, right? So you want to get out of the house? Well, create that wake. Don't keep being that car alarm saying, we gotta go, but actually start walking out the door. And even better, start talking about something of high interest, right? I imagine in your head, you are walking to your car as you need to get out the door and you're saying, hey, tell me about that Minecraft game, but I'm still walking. So if they want to talk to me about Minecraft, they got to be with me. Or, oh my gosh, I heard this amazing, incredible thing about whatever. Some scientific discovery your child is into, or some other thing that's in their passion area. Or, hey, I saw this thing and I was wondering if you'd want it, and you're still walking, just creating that wake for them. And also humor. Oh my gosh, when my kids, okay, so can I tell you, Emily, when my middle guy went for his second out of 4 neuropsych assessments in his life, he showed up without shoes. Okay, no kidding. I knocked on the door and I was like, do we really, ADHD, really, do we have to look into that? I think we know. Anyway.
Do we have to go any further?
Yeah, really, exactly. I think I know. So I created a song that I sang with my kids about putting their shoes on. Because I could either A, scream my head off, B, put the shoes on for them, or C, become like this crazy jazz rock singer singing about how to put your shoes on and we got to put our shoes on. And so humor is great for transitions. Creating that wake is great for transitions. Collaborating is great for those transitions. It's really playing to the strengths and stopping doing the same thing, guys. I know you've been doing every morning, saying it over and over and over and hoping it's going to change. It will change, I promise, but we got to do some stuff to save our own mental health, really.
You mentioned earlier that kids who are neurodivergent or twice exceptional very likely have parents who are neurodivergent or twice exceptional, or just some characteristics. If there are some adults in our audience who are starting to realize maybe they're also struggling with transitions, I mean, I think some of the things we've talked about might be good, but do you have any ideas of what should they watch for to see if that is something that they're struggling with? And then if so, is there anything that they can do to kind of adjust for their own self-regulation?
Yeah, so it's a great question. I work with 2E adults. I mentor 2E adults, and I'm thinking of one who's a particularly accomplished person who, oh my goodness gracious, she will just say, I just can't get started, or I start a million things and I can't finish. And so we talk a lot about, first of all, knowing what your strengths are and knowing what's a challenge. And like, instead of sitting there in your challenge area all day long, like, let's outsource. You're a grown up. Find somebody who can actually do that for you. Like, can you express what is challenging? Now, if it's like getting started on working out, okay, now we got to find an incentivize yourself to do that. What are you going to reward yourself with if you do that? It's playing tricks. It's using all the technology that you can to remind yourself of things. It's, doing all of those things. And really, first of all, recognizing that it's a thing, that this is not like you're broken or you need to be fixed. You can't be great at everything, guys. So, there's got to be a place where there's a struggle, and take stock. How much does it matter? Does it matter? Right? Are you killing yourself over something that doesn't really matter? Can you get support from your partner or your spouse? I have a client who takes certain vitamins and medicine, and spouse is the one who puts it in those little boxes and hands it to her, and she outsourced, right? So if you can do that, that is a great idea. But do not beat yourself up about challenges. It's all part of, growing and living your life.
I mean, I know that there are things that I'm still realizing about myself and adapting to and finding ways to kind of self-accommodate. I was talking to somebody the other day and I made this realization that I get really stressed out if somebody uses my scheduling link and schedules something within about 24 hours when I thought I had a block of time to do something else. So I changed the setting. Mm-hmm. That was a transition for me, really. And I didn't have enough time to transition if I already kind of had in my mind that I had that time. But just having a 36-hour window where people can't put things on my calendar, that's enough for me to be able to go, okay, I can handle this. Mm-hmm. You don't realize how some of those very small things can get under your skin and really influence your overall mood and functioning.
Yeah, the MicroStresses for sure, drip by drip out of that bucket of resilience, man, they really affect you. But it was having the knowledge that that's like being able to, first of all, who pauses and thinks or ponders anymore? I mean, if we have a second, we check our phone. Mm-hmm. So give yourself space. A lot of 2E people push against meditation because their brains, some people love it. Some people really can't deal with it. And so I will recommend to start with 30 seconds that you're doing nothing and your eyes are closed and just see what bubbles up. When you go for a walk, I don't care if you wear earbuds in your head, but just don't use them. Mm-hmm. Just see what bubbles up and give yourself some time so that you can recognize, oh my God, this is a microstress. It's really bothering me. Can I do something about it like Emily did for her schedule?
Yeah. It's been surprising how much when I did that, it made just a difference. It's like, you just don't even think about those things sometimes.
Yeah.
So this conversation has been just really super practical, and I think it's going to be really useful for our listeners. As we wrap up, I'm curious, if you were talking directly to one of the parents that you work with who's trying to work to build self-regulation skills with their child, what's the one thing that you would say to them? Like, what's the one piece of advice you'd want them to hear?
Stop trying to solve the problem for your kid. Validate and reiterate. That is really, okay, so you said one, but I want to kind of give two.
That's okay.
Is it okay? I'm not following the rules. So validating and reiterating is really important. But as I think in my head, there is no magic bullet. But there is some secret sauce. So I want to share the secret sauce. Okay. This is the Julie Skolnick strategy that I love. That is surprisingly complicated, but extraordinarily simple. And it's called noticing verbs like action words. For 2E kids, we know that they are redirected 40 times more than neurotypical. For neurodivergent people, 40 times more than neurotypical people. Redirected or told, why can't you? Why don't you? When will you? Why won't you? And so if you can notice the verbs, very specifically the actions that the person is doing that meets your expectations, without adding on thank you, without adding on I'm proud of you, because that actually indicates that they're doing it for you and external motivation. If you can say, wow, I noticed today that when it was really loud, you were able to find the earplugs and put them in your ears and continue doing what you needed to do. Or it can be as simple as, I noticed that you took your plate off the table and put it in the dishwasher. It is a huge difference than saying, thank you, or I'm proud of you. I will tell you, so often I hear from my clients that their kids come back and say, thank you, when they notice verbs. Because it's like, oh, you're seeing my effort. I am trying. The more you notice the positives and the things that your kids are doing, or you notice verbs, the more they want to keep doing it.
Julie Skolnick from With Understanding Comes Calm. Thank you so much for your time today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me and doing this incredible podcast.
Parents of bright, neurodivergent kids are always looking for ideas and strategies that will help them understand and support their children. Unfortunately, the advice that works for the mythical average child doesn't always apply to twice exceptional kids. The more parents work to understand their 2E kids, the more our kids will learn to understand themselves. The more we advocate for our neurodivergent children, the more they will learn to advocate for themselves. We can be the role models in creating the neurodiversity affirming world that we want our children to grow up in. I'm Emily Kircher-Morris. I'll see you next time on the Neurodiversity Podcast.
Thanks again to Julie Skolnick. We have a lot of information about her, like her website, some of her workshops and events, and more, on the episode 124 page at neurodiversitypodcast.com. Our thanks to Alex Slane, Alice Spence, John Allen, and Martin Clem. They made the music for this episode. Our host is Emily Kircher-Morris. A big welcome aboard to our social media and production assistant, Krista Brown. Good to have you with us, Krista. The executive producer and post-production editor is me, Dave Morris. For everyone here, thanks for listening. See you next time. This is a production of the Neurodiversity Alliance.